We'll clear this place and turn it into a B&B.
My husband David said it, and both Emily and I exclaimed in surprise. What? What are you talking about? At the same time as the shock, we were certain that the scene before us was undoubtedly the site where my parents' home had been demolished. Hey, can you explain this to us in a way we can understand? Is this your doing? I pressed David, who was still smirking, with a stronger tone of voice. Seeing David like that, my daughter Emily suddenly burst out laughing.
Wait a minute. Stop it, Dad.
It seems like she's filled with a mix of pity and amusement from the absurd and ridiculous behavior of her father, who has been holding her back all this time. Gasping for breath, Emily continued.
Grandpa's house was worth a fortune, you know.
Emily said that, then suddenly turned serious.
That's like totally criminal, right?
Upon hearing his daughter's words, David realized too late the irreversible mistake he had made. My name is Sarah Brightman. I'm a 48-year-old housewife. Currently, I live with my husband David and our only daughter, Emily. Emily is 19 and a freshman in college, but it seems she has no plans to move out anytime soon. Being women, it's been a blessing that Emily, who has been on my side since childhood, is still with us at home. That's also because we have a common enemy, David, which makes it even more so. David and I met when I was still working as an office employee. After graduating from community college, I worked as an administrative assistant at a local trading company. David, who was in sales at another company, was a frequent visitor there. Though sales sounds impressive, David had a job that was like being a general errand runner, going around different companies. He always had a friendly demeanor, even towards me, an administrative assistant, and I didn't form a negative impression of him. As we saw each other weekly, we started chatting and eventually became close. As I thought, David was being exploited like being a general errand runner at his company, and his earnings were modest. But perhaps because I was still young, I was fully convinced that love would conquer all. For a while, I continued working and supporting our home, but I quit my job when I became pregnant. David wanted me to focus on childcare, expressing his wish for me to stay at home. When Emily was born, naturally, my workload increased. In place of David, who was out working during the day, I had to take care of Emily, cook, do the laundry, and clean all by myself. I managed to get through those days, but by the time Emily entered kindergarten, David's attitude towards me had changed. Taking advantage of my silence, David's behavior became increasingly overbearing. At the company, David was ridiculed by everyone and taken advantage of. It turns out I was his outlet for relieving this frustration. He wasn't so self-deprecating when we first met, but perhaps there was a problem with me sympathizing with David too much. The people at work just dump all their troubles on David. They don't recognize your abilities. I think you shouldn't worry about it. I meant it as consolation, but this gave David a twisted confidence.
Do you also think you're better than me, that you can belittle me?
Whenever I tried to offer even a slight critique, David would fly into a rage. This wore me down, and I found myself unable to say anything. My actions, accumulated over time, certainly contributed to David's increasing arrogance. Enduring it for the sake of our daughter has undoubtedly led to our current marital situation. However, I was only trying to be a kind wife and did nothing blameworthy. Upon closer reflection, it's all quite absurd, but the thought of "for the sake of my daughter" is what stops my train of thought. As we got older, our marital problems only twisted further. Although I remain a housewife, in society, there's things about age-appropriate roles and status. Such thoughts, even if unspoken, can be conveyed through behavior. David, overly sensitive to such external perceptions, let them exacerbate his negativity. He became more self-deprecating, making conversations with him incredibly draining. I hadn't noticed before we were married, but it seems this aspect of his personality hasn't changed since childhood, and David appears to have no friends. At our wedding, only David's relatives were present, and there were no friends. I didn't think much of it at the time, but upon reflection, it's a strange situation indeed. I still regret not noticing these finer points of David's behavior while we were dating. Certainly, compared to the general public, David's position at his company was low, but there are many in similar situations. I can understand being bothered if one is nagged by family upon returning home, but I never once complained to David about such matters. Therefore, no matter what I did, David's attitude remained unchanged. Originally shy, David never vented his stress outside. Instead, it was all directed at me and our daughter, Emily. His drinking increased day by day, and with each drink, he would loudly rampage, breaking things around the house. Although he never physically harmed us, the exchange of hurtful words escalated.
Do you realize who you owe your college education to? Always clinging to your mom. Think properly about who you should be grateful to.
It's often heard that teenage daughters despise their fathers, but Emily had solid reasons for disliking David. Enduring such irrational scoldings daily, it's only natural she would feel this way. When David was not around, Emily and I would share our grievances with each other to get through the day. During this time, my father, who lived in the same state, fell ill. Since my mother had passed away a few years earlier, he was living alone in my childhood home. My brother, John, who runs a business in the city, was busy, so it fell upon me to check on our father. The diagnosis he received at the hospital wasn't exactly cause for celebration. I blamed myself for not noticing sooner. Despite being aware of his condition, my father, not wanting to worry John or me, who both had our own families, kept silent. Following discussions with the doctor, it was decided that he would be admitted to the hospital and receive continued treatment to the fullest extent possible. Still, it was clear that his condition was worsening day by day, prompting John to frequently leave his business to visit him. I was bracing myself for what was to come. Of course, my days were filled with visits to the hospital. Even as a housewife, managing all the household duties as before was no longer feasible. Emily visited her grandfather a few times, willingly helping me out. But David was not pleased with this.
Have you been using more TV dinner lately? You're home all day. There's no need for frozen food, right? And relying on your daughter only now. You should consider our life here too.
He took the opportunity to scold me and, at the same time, speak ill of my father. After all the care my father had provided, how could he say such things? Had he forgotten how much trouble he had caused my father? There was a time when David's earnings were not enough to support us, especially after Emily was born. And our living costs increased as I left my job to focus on child care, according to David's wishes. It was an inevitable outcome, yet David unapologetically pressured me to manage somehow. Out of options, I explained the situation to my father, who quietly helped us with financial support without saying a word, even knowing David's circumstances. Unaware of my father's feelings, David took this for granted and relied on his generosity for a while. Although David's income eventually increased slightly, he never expressed gratitude to my father. To avoid upsetting David, I dodged the topic and continued my visits to my father. However, soon after, my father's condition dramatically worsened, and he passed away. Emily and I were overwhelmed by a profound sense of loss, but there were still many tasks to handle. Arranging various documents, preparing for the funeral. Just thinking about it made my head spin, but staying busy helped distract my mind. While I was nearby, unaware to me, David muttered,
"Finally, we can have a decent meal."
His insensitive remark irritated me, but I lacked the energy to argue, and just swallowed my words. Even though my father's funeral had concluded, my emotions were still heavy. It was unusual to see David showing a cooperative attitude in sorting out the belongings of my childhood home. Perhaps reflecting on his past behavior, he actively helped with cleaning up the house.
"I've gathered the papers, but is this everything here?"
His words reminded me of the safe my father had tucked away in the closet, and I asked David to check its contents too. I remembered that I had received the key to the safe when my father was hospitalized, and handed the small key to David.
"This was all that was in the safe,"
David said, handing me some old bills and a family tree document he retrieved from it. I hadn't expected much, but since he had made a point of handing me the key, I thought there might be something more valuable inside. That's why I was disappointed by the contents of the safe handed over from David. I shrugged it off, thinking that's just how it goes, and decided to return to the remaining sorting tasks. The cleanup didn't finish that day, but over the next few days, we completed tidying up my childhood home. Finally able to catch my breath, I was overwhelmed with immense fatigue. At that time, I received a call from my brother, who had returned to New York.
"I'm really sorry for leaving all the cleanup to you. If there's anything I can do, please let me know."
He repeatedly expressed his gratitude before getting to the point.
"By the way, was there a property deed for the family home among the documents Dad kept? It might seem underhanded to ask about this after Dad's gone, but there's something I need to discuss with you, Sarah."
Upon saying that, my brother began talking about the inheritance of our father's estate. My brother, who runs a company that ventures into various businesses, was also considering entering the food and beverage industry. He wanted the rights to our family home for that purpose. I vaguely remember being told as a child that our house had cultural value. The building had a unique design, and now that I think about it, it had the vibe of a trendy old farmhouse cafe that's been popular lately. It seems his plan was to use our family home as it is for a cafe.
Actually, I had gotten permission from Dad a long time ago. He had told me that everything else would go to you, Sarah. I know it's late, but could you agree to this plan?
My brother has always been fond of me since we were kids, and he's still single. I don't think he's after a large share of the inheritance for himself. I am well aware that he has more than enough savings. I wouldn't know what to do with the family home myself, and if you're okay with it, John. I honestly agreed with my brother's wishes and decided to transfer the rights to the family home to him. Even if I continue to manage it, it would eventually have to be demolished. It's better for my brother to make good use of it and keep our family home standing.
Thank you, then. Could you look for the property deed among the documents Dad left?
David had gathered the documents in one place, so it should be among them. I told John I would contact him as soon as I found the documents and ended the call. Come to think of it, I haven't looked at those documents since then. They should be in a clear folder, I believe. Recalling the case David had given me with the documents inside, I searched through it. However, no matter how much I searched, I couldn't find a property deed to the family home that my brother mentioned. That's weird. I put all the documents here. Could they still be at the family home? I was suddenly alarmed at the thought that I might have accidentally thrown them away, but I wouldn't know until I visited the family home. Not wanting to live with this anxiety, I decided to go there immediately to check. Arriving at the family home, I couldn't believe my eyes. At the location where the family home once stood, there were countless debris scattered around, indicating it has been demolished. Did I take a wrong turn somewhere? But no, that can't be right. In a panic, I called Emily to explain the situation. About my brother's plans to turn the family home into a cafe and its cultural value. Sensing my distress, Emily said, "I'm coming right now," and hung up. True to her word, Emily soon rushed to my location.
Mom, what happened?
She seemed to have hurried, her long hair wildly disheveled. Breathless, Emily looked at me with concern. The family house, I can't seem to find it anymore. As I explained the situation to Emily over and over, I gradually began to calm down.
You're not wrong, Mom. This is definitely Grandpa's place.
As Emily said, the fact that she came straight here means this is undoubtedly where my parents' home stood. Or rather, where it used to be. It's only been a few weeks since my father's funeral. I can't begin to guess what happened. Could my brother know something about this? But we were just on the phone a while ago. That can't be possible. This makes the reason for the demolition of the family home even more puzzling. From the look of the site, it seemed like the work was still in progress, but no one was in sight as far as I could see. What should I do in this situation? Call the police. I tried to calm my head, which was once again in confusion, while also listening to Emily's opinion. Then, from a distance, I saw someone walking towards us.
Is that Could that be Dad walking towards us?
Emily exclaimed in surprise. I squinted at the approaching figure to confirm. Indeed, it was David, sloppily dressed in a suit, staggering towards us. It's just after 3 p.m. now. Is he on his way back from his rounds? Still, it's odd to run into him here by chance. My confusion deepened with David's arrival, and all I could do was wait for him to speak. As David got closer, I could see a smug smile forming on his face. Despite him being my husband, the sight sent a chill through my body.
Oh, both of you are right here,
David said with a smirk, stopping in front of me and Emily. Neither Emily nor I could open our mouths due to the strangeness of the situation, waiting for David to explain.
We're gonna clear this place and turn it into a bed and breakfast.
At David's words, Emily and I exclaimed in surprise simultaneously. What are you talking about? With the shock, we were certain that the scene before us was undoubtedly where the family home had been demolished. But there's no way we could just accept it with a yes, okay. What on earth was David thinking? Even as my mind raced to understand his true intentions, I couldn't grasp any answer. Can you explain to us in a way that we can understand? Is this your doing? I pressed David, who was still smirking, with a stronger tone of voice.
Yeah, I did it all. We need to clear the place first to move forward. I plan to build the B&B with the savings I've accumulated and my retirement pay. Of course, I'll need you to chip in too.
David spoke in a somewhat grandiose manner, showing no remorse. Could there possibly be a valid reason for this outrageous act? David seemed to be somewhat irritated by the angry and confused expressions on the faces of me and Emily. With a resigned attitude, he continued.
I've been wanting to start something on my own for a while now. Everyone just keeps bossing me around without recognizing my talents. I'm not okay with that. So I've decided to run a B&B here.
David stated confidently, then once again gauged our reactions. However, such an explanation only deepened our confusion. I'm sorry, I have no idea what you're trying to say, I admitted, as fear began to spread within me due to his incomprehensible behavior.
I just quit my job, told off all those annoying people, and slammed down my resignation. The timing of Dad's passing is a message to me. It's time for me to take charge.
David ranted in an excited state. Though his words were disjointed, his intention was clear. He planned to leave his job and start running a bed and breakfast. To be in charge without anyone criticizing him, to lead his life his way. Turning this into a B&B, you know this land belongs to Dad and my brother, right? You think it's okay to do this without permission. It seemed Dad had always talked about transferring the rights to the family home and land to my brother, so it cannot be that those rights had been passed to David. It was unthinkable that my brother was deceiving me, and it's not normal for a husband to quit his job and demolish the family home without consulting his wife.
Permission or not, I have the property deed. Being entrusted with the estate cleanup means we can do what we want with what's left, right? There's nothing to forgive or not. I'm your husband.
David responded, seemingly without any guilt, lecturing me and Emily. That makes no sense at all, I shouted as soon as David finished speaking. His utterly selfish and childish logic was too much for me to bear. This is my father's house, inherited by me and my brother. How can you, who are not even blood related, do this on your own? David seemed to realize the seriousness of the matter after my scolding, although his smug smile briefly faded, only to quickly return as he justified his actions again.
What kind of way is that to talk to your husband? Who do you think has provided for you all this time? You two should just quietly follow what I say.
David, face red with anger, raised his voice without restraint. He was panting heavily, perhaps from the overwhelming excitement. Watching David's behavior, Emily suddenly burst into laughter.
Hold on. Stop it, Dad.
Tears were even appearing in Emily's eyes. It seems like she's filled with a mix of pity and amusement from the absurd and ridiculous behavior of her father, who has been holding her back all this time.
Dad, don't you know?
Gasping for breath, Emily spoke to David, who was intently watching her.
Grandpa's house was worth a lot. You know, you just described the house Uncle John got.
Emily then suddenly became serious again.
That's like totally criminal, right?
David's face rapidly drained of color, perhaps becoming sobered by his college-age daughter's remark.
What are you talking about? How can you say such things to your father?
He raised his voice, but it lacked any real force or authority. It seemed he was somewhere aware of his mistake. He tried to push through with it in the heat of the moment, but once his daughter said it, there was no turning back. Neither my brother nor I could ever condone such an act. I'll contact John for now. The cafe project should be underway. David knew my brother ran a business, so my words alone were enough for him to grasp the situation.
What? That's bad. There's media coverage, and contracts are already advancing. I'll call back later, but please don't do anything more with that place.
My brother sounded panicked as he hung up after hearing my explanation. Just make sure nothing more is done. This has turned into a huge mess. From the sound of my brother's voice over the phone, both Emily and David's faces contorted. It seemed David had been plotting to build a bed and breakfast here ever since he said he would clean up the estate. He helped with the family home's cleanup, intending to find the property deed.
I didn't know about turning this house into a cafe. Isn't it common sense to mention such important things in advance?
Though David's face had turned pale earlier, he now started shifting the blame onto me and my brother. His face returning to its usual defiance, acting as if he had done nothing wrong. Anyway, don't do anything more. Right now, my brother is hurriedly contacting his business partners. Dumbfounded by David's audacity, I decided to wait for my brother's call. Then I noticed a man in a suit running towards us from across the street.
Excuse me, are you Mrs. Sarah Brightman?
The man, who offered his business card, turned out to be my brother's secretary. He had been sent from my brother's company in New York for the cafe opening, and had rushed here after hearing about the situation at the family home.
I was just in a meeting with the president of the company collaborating on this cafe project. The president is hurrying over here, but the business party is very upset.
After checking David's face, the secretary continued.
I've heard the gist from the president, but it seems there will be significant liability for damages. Even if you are his sister's husband, you will have to bear those responsibilities.
Until now, David might have felt detached from reality, only being reprimanded by Emily and me. Hearing the word liability from a stranger in a suit, David's face turned pale again.
Mom, can we afford to pay that? What's going to happen to us?
Emily's soft mutter seemed to be the last straw, and David just slumped to the ground. Supporting David's limp body, we decided to head back home for the time being. We invited the secretary into our home and waited for my brother's arrival from New York. We understood the gravity of the situation, but were powerless to do anything on our own. As the frustrating hours passed and night fell, my brother finally came to see us.
Sarah, I'm sorry, but David will have to take appropriate responsibility.
My brother said soberly before starting to explain the current situation. The project to open a cafe using the family home had started sometime after our father passed away. My brother's company is well known in the industry, and its business party had eagerly commenced work on the proposal brought by my brother. That meant they had halted their ongoing projects to put all their efforts into this joint venture with my brother. It was clear that canceling the cafe project now would result in tremendous losses. My brother was trying everything possible to keep the project alive. But if the family home itself has been demolished, I couldn't help but blurt out words as I recalled the scene that was right in front of me just moments ago.
I just saw it myself earlier, and it was definitely a sloppy demolition job. It might take time, but since the materials are still there, we might be able to restore it.
My brother sighed deeply as he spoke, his face still stern.
David, I didn't want to say this, but what you did is a crime. It's not something that can be simply apologized for, but you will be joining me on an apology process.
David, still pale, seemed frozen in place but slowly nodded in acknowledgement. Just a few hours ago, he was so proud, talking about his future plans, but now not a trace of that remained. I felt utterly embarrassed to expose such a disgraceful side of my husband in front of my brother. My lack of judgment has led to this dire situation. While my brother wouldn't blame me, I had no intention of staying with David any longer. On paper, David and I were still married, but to me, he had become a complete stranger. Accompanied by my brother and the secretary, David faced an unimaginable reprimand during the apology process to the associated companies. To explain the situation, the truth had to be told. When my brother disclosed the full story to them, those who were calm with my brother turned their criticism unanimously towards David. David had believed his lack of recognition was due to others, but facing direct condemnation like "you're finished as a person," his spirit easily crumbled. When brought back home by my brother, his eyes were vacant, looking like he might collapse at any moment.
Fortunately, everyone accepted the apology, considering my reputation, but of course, after taking on the appropriate compensation responsibilities.
David, following my brother, must have heard enough about the specific amount of damages. It was understandable for that to overwhelm his thoughts. However, I had also reached my limit. I pushed the documents I had prepared in front of David, who was sitting down. Now you finally understand why you're not valued, right? You are a failure as a person. My patience has run out. I clearly declared to David, urging him to sign the divorce papers. Upon hearing this from his wife, who had always been compliant, David started to cry.
Please, don't abandon me. What's gonna happen to me like this? I quit my job, you know. We've been living together all this time. We're family, aren't we?
Considering he had never really thought about us except as an outlet for his stress, his seemingly reasonable words now had no impact on me. Ignoring David's pleas, I continued to stare at the divorce papers. Speaking up wouldn't mean anything at this point, nor would it benefit David. After a while, sensing my resolute decision, David slowly signed. It was over now. David and I officially became strangers. Months later, thanks to my brother's generosity, David avoided criminal charges, but he was left with enormous debt. He took on the liability for the halted project and, due to our divorce, was also ordered to pay alimony for his arbitrary actions and verbal abuse. It was a predictable outcome, yet David failed to foresee it. How many people did he inconvenience with his thoughtless actions? The apology process with my brother must have made him fully realize it. Fortunately, his resignation wasn't taken seriously by his boss, so he didn't lose his job, which would have been his only means of repaying the massive debt. The workplace environment would be harsher, but he was lucky to be forgiven for his outrageous actions. David lost his family and assets, and his pride in his supposed excellence was shattered. This would be the greatest punishment for him. I worried about the impact of our divorce on Emily, but she was already an adult. She seemed to take things less heavily than I had feared.
With Mom around, I'll be fine, and I'm an adult now,
Emily said cheerfully, perhaps to comfort me. My brother's project to renovate and rebuild the family home managed to recover. Though the alimony from David and the inheritance from our father meant we could get by, I ended up being entrusted with running my brother's cafe. The people from the business associate company that launched the cafe with my brother trusted me and delegated various tasks to me. Thanks to this, I'm living a more fulfilling life than during my days as a housewife. Being able to work where I lived with my parents and brother brings me great joy. Marriage isn't the only source of happiness in life. I might have lost a sense of security that comes from being cared for by someone, but in another way, it means I've gained freedom. Now I don't feel gloomy. On the contrary, I am more optimistic and cheerful. I have found new purpose and am filled with hope.